Hello everybody, today we're going to talk about permissions and authentications. So we know that REST framework provides us with many methods of authentications and permissions. And what we're going to do now, we're going to speak about what's the best to use and how to use it. And we will do that using decorators, because now we are using a function-based view, as you remember in the last app we created. So guys, let's check the documentation and see what options we have. On the documentations, if you go to Django REST framework authentications, we can see that first thing first, REST framework provides us with two default authentication methods. First one is basic authentication, second one is session authentication. So basic authentication is basically when you provide a username, password to the server or where you're hosting your API, and then the server will check if the passwords or the credentials, the password and username are correct. Then we'll give a response telling that that this request is authorized, and will give us like the username, for example. Session authentication is a bit different, because session authentication actually relies on something called session. And session, what is session? Session is when the server creates some kind of data to store some information about the user. For example, after first login from the user, the server will create kind of let's say dictionary, or in JSON format, kind of data about the user, like an ID. It will give the user an ID. It will give maybe it will store some metadata about the user, like if the user is admin or a normal user. Maybe it will store what pages this user visited, or from which page the user made the request. It's just kind of tracking users are in the website. So what happens is the server will send this, after creating this session data, will send it to the browser, and it will get saved there, maybe in the local storage, maybe in the memory or something like that. So if the user comes back, the user doesn't need to log in again, because the session data is there. So the user can carry on using, because this session data has an ID that will be sent back to the server to authenticate. So or to tell the server that this is the same user that was using this before, and something like that. So, but we're not going to be using that. Actually, what we're going to be using now is token authentication. Token authentication is a secure authentication, and is very reliable and secure, and highly recommended. And actually, most of the APIs use token authentication, especially in the applications where you use, for example, a mobile app, or a desktop or web app, and you need to send requests to your server API. So what we need to use token authentication. To use token authentication, we need two things. First, we need to add REST framework auth token to our installed app, which we know. Where is it? If you go to our settings, the main project, here all our apps added here. So to use token authentication, we need to add the app here. So we can add it here. For example, maybe we add it here before. It doesn't matter, but I just keep things, a bit organized. So REST framework auth token must be installed there. And the second thing, as you see in the documentation, we need to define in our, well, maybe it's not here. So if we go here, where the REST framework is, you see here default authentication classes. We have basic authentication, session authentications. I'm gonna comment out those because we're not gonna be using them, and I'm gonna be using the token authentication. So this is what I'm gonna be putting here. It must be a string. It's a list of strings. So it needs to be token authentication. Okay, to make sure we're spelling it right, we need to come here. Yeah, that's it. Token authentication. So after we added that, you see, now we added that to the setting. We told our REST framework that default authentication classes must be a token authentication, and we installed the REST framework auth token and installed app. Now after that, we need to tell the REST framework or the API or our server what permissions to use, because if we chose to use token authentication, we need to tell the server or the API that the permission that we need to use is authenticated. So if we go back to the documentation and we go to permissions, so let's see what permissions REST framework can provide. Okay, so first thing first, if you look here, you see here, this is a default permission classes. Okay, it says if we are using a token authentication, so we need to add this to the permissions. It says is authenticated. Okay, don't worry about this now. So is authenticated is when you use token authentication class or authentication method, okay, that requires token. Okay, so what about allow any? If you remember, we used allow any in the last tutorial, and why we used it is because we needed to make things simple and allow all the requests to that API through that endpoint or URL. What else we have here? We have as admin user. So what that means is if the user is already a user, is not enough to do that request. It needs to be a registered user plus as an admin user. Okay, is authenticated or read only. Okay, what that means? That means the user that's making a request to our API, if it's authenticated user or authorized user, then it will have access to all the functionality like put, post, and other get, all of them. But if it's not authenticated, that means we can't give those unsafe permissions where the person who's doing the request can modify our database or can add, delete. We can't do that. We give them a read-only permission, so we give them access to get, or option or head, also those simple safe requests. Okay, a Django model permissions or a Django model permissions or none read only. Those are included in the Django framework, which we can access them from within an admin panel and choose them. I will show you that when we run the server. Okay, so we're not going to talk about custom permissions or object permissions at the moment. So let's give it a shot and then let's add those authentications. So we need to add this, as we said, to our permission classes. Okay, we need to comment out this because we're not going to be using it now. String as usual, and okay, let's save this. So after I did that, let's take a look to the view. You see here in our view, we said we can, when we're using a function-based view, you can use decorator to define which permissions we need to use. Okay, so I'm gonna remove this now. I'll comment out this. Okay, after we did the configuration in our settings for .py file, now any request we need to make to our API, it needs to be authenticated. Okay, in other words, we need to include a token on or in our request header. If you check the data, the documentation here, I want to show you when we're talking about authentication, and if we check the token authentication, see, token authentication is appropriate for client-server setups. Okay, such as we said, or mobile clients. And I'm just looking where to show you what they recommend for that, but it doesn't seem to be here. Okay, anyway, I'll show you now when we do it. So as I said, any request we do to our server, after we activate the token authentication and is authenticated, it needs to include token. Where we get the token from, you know that because the last tutorial we spoke about, or we showed you how we got the token after we added Django REST auth to our project. So let's run the server and see that in action. Okay, so first let's activate our virtual environment. /env scripts activate. After that, let's navigate to our API project, and now we can run the server. Let me get rid of this. So it's giving me an error, says application labels are unique, duplicate auth token. So maybe auth token was there and I added it again. Let's see. Yeah, it's already there, so I don't have to add it again. Okay. We save this. Okay, here we go. We have our server running. Let's go to the website and try to do a request to our first app, which is, let me get the URL right. So it starts with first app, then first. And we'll see what request we will get. So when I send a request to this URL, what I got from the server or from the API, authentication credential were not provided. What that means? That means I told the server, or I told the API to ask for authentication token. Okay, so I now made a request without providing that. So that's why the server gave me that response. So in order to provide that and see how it was, I'm going to use a very handy application called Postman. Postman is an application that firstly was made to test APIs. Okay, that's what the purpose of it, and it's very handy, and it's very helpful when it comes to testing APIs, sending requests, adding credentials or headers or all of that. So here, let's provide the URL. We can copy the URL from here. Okay, and choose what request we need. We need a GET request. Okay, if we go to headers, what we need to add here, we need to add a key value called authentication, and then we need to add this is the key authentication, which we need to use to authenticate. Type of authentication is token authentication, so we need to add the keyword token space, then we put the token for the user. Where we can get the token for the user, we can get it from our admin. If we go to admin, so it's my API, password, okay, let's try again. I'm not sure if I forgot the password. Maybe I did. No, I didn't. Okay, so as we know, we spoke about first, we have tokens here. Tokens is a unique keys that gets generated for each user that gets registered to the database. So for this user, this is the token that we need to use. Okay, so we copy this token and we come to the Postman application. So before we do that, let's try to send a GET request to this URL without adding a token. Okay, if we sending request, what we're getting here, invalid token header, no credential provided. Okay, so no credential provided, we get nothing. Okay, let's provide a credential. Let's provide a token. So if we add the token here, so now we are telling the server when we send this request that the person who's sending this request is a registered user. And now we can try again and see. You see, we got the request. So the server recognized that this user is authenticated, is a registered user, and sent us a request as we coded here in our view. Okay, so basically that's it. Okay, basically that's it. So this will be applied to all the views that we will be writing or coding, because basically it's in our application settings. Okay, it's here. Okay, there's two ways to do that. Either doing it here, okay, or doing it here in our views. So maybe this is the general rule that you need to, or authentication class that you need to associate to all the users in your server. But if you need a specific authentication for specific view in your API or specific database, you can always use decorators to modify that. For example, if I uncomment this, okay, now the server knows, or we told the server that every request must be authenticated, as you said. But I came here to our view and I told now my server or my API that for this specific view, I need all the user to be able to access. So now if I go and try to do a request, and if I need to remove the token now. Sorry. I removed the token and I will send a request. I'll still get the request because this has a high priority. So our server or API ignored, for this particular view, ignored what we wrote here in our settings and listened only to what we wrote here. Okay, so we made a specific rules for each view we have. Okay, and if we do it the other way around, I mean, if we choose to do it this way, if I told, let's say this will be allow any, okay, allow any, and if I save it, that means all the requests to our server or API will be accepted. Okay, no authentication is needed. Okay, if I come here to views and comment this out and save, if I come here, okay, I don't provide any authorization or any token and I send a request, I will get a response from the server because I told the server all the requests are allowed. Okay, even though I said that on the settings, if I come here and import the permission that says is authenticated and I use this here, now if we test, let's go to the postman and I send a request. Let's say authentication credentials were not provided, which means I need to provide a token here. And if I go here and provide a token, okay, and let's go get the token. And send, I got the request. So that's it, guys. For this tutorial, we wanted to just show you how it works, or how you can add authentications, add permissions, and how can you play with them, or can make specific authentication for your view, regardless what you wrote in your settings. Which means if you have multiple views, multiple applications, you can tell each view or you can associate a different permission class to each view you want, depends on what you want to do with it. Okay, so that's it, guys, for this tutorial, and until the next one, thank you.